Hi, I'm Father Jim Forson, and I'd like to share with you some reflections on the gospel of this 10th Sunday in Ordinary Time. A few weeks ago, I was celebrating Mass for our men's prayer group, the Cornerstone Prayer Group. And the gospel at that Mass was the story about Jesus creating a bit of a scandal because he was eating with tax collectors and prostitutes, and people were shocked at that. So I said to the Cornerstone men in my homily, I gave them this question. I said, imagine you're me, and this couple in the parish just bought a house, and they invite you to come over and bless it, but this couple is just living together. They're not married. And as we know, that's not something the church approves of. So tell me, what do I do? Do I go over and bless the house? Well, if I do that, it might look to other people like I'm approving of this and giving it the blessing of the church. But if I don't go bless it, what kind of message am I saying to this couple? And I can almost guarantee you that if they were thinking about getting married in the church, after that reception, they sure won't. And so what do? Do I go over or do I not? And then I said to the men, let me make it a little bit harder. Let's say it's this couple in the parish and they are married, but they're not married in the church. Now, likewise, we want our couples who are married to be married in the church, and they're not sacramentally at one with us. And so do I go bless the house or not? Again, if I do, it might look like I'm giving the approval of the church to it. And if I don't, it might really be insulting to the family. Like, what, we aren't good enough for you? So what do I do? And then I said, let me make it a little bit harder. Let's say it's a gay couple, and they're coming to Mass every Sunday, and they have kids in the school. And they call me up, and they invite me over for dinner and to bless the house. Now, do I go? Because if I go, what's going to happen is those kids are going to be excited Father Jim is there, and they're going to tell their classmates the next day, and they'll tell their family, and pretty soon the whole parish is going to know. So do I go? Because if I do, it might look like, well, what's going on here? Is Father Jim, is the Catholic Church approving of the gay lifestyle or not? Or what? Or if I don't go, what am I saying to these Catholics who go to Mass every Sunday and are raising their kids in the church? So what do I say? What do I do? Do I go or do I not go? And then I said, let me make it a little bit harder. And one of the men sitting at the Mass said, no, don't. That's hard enough. And so I said, let me make it a little bit harder. Let's go ahead and say 2 Democrats invited me over for dinner. And this guy yells out, that's where I draw the line. It was hilarious. But it's safe to say that the way we understand, or at least the way I understood families when I was growing up, is changing dramatically. And what I just described to you with all those various scenarios are all the different ways families are presenting themselves and are presented to the world, and for that matter too, in our churches. So it's so different than when I was a kid growing up, because families were, well, that traditional idea of, mom, dad, kids, grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins, and that's it. That's the family. And it was very clearly understood and easily defined. But even back then, just as now, the earth was moving under our feet. Things were starting to change in the way we understood families to be. Because when my mom and dad married, my dad was the first one to ever marry outside the Swedish clan. And my mom was the very first one to ever marry outside the Irish. And not just that. My dad was the first one to ever marry someone who wasn't a Lutheran. And my mom was the first one to ever marry someone who wasn't a Catholic. And in those days, you just did not do that. You didn't marry non-Catholics, ever. And Lutherans married Lutherans, and Catholics married Catholics, and that's just the way it was. And so when my mom and dad got engaged, it was a big, almost a scandal. And even though my dad became a Catholic, they couldn't tell anybody because they knew if the family found out, they would be shocked and angry. And so they kept that secret. But even then, when they got married, some people wore black to the wedding. It was just that shocking a thing, which now we look upon as, are you kidding me? But then that was a big deal. Even back then, with those traditional understanding of families, even then the earth was moving under our feet and things were changing. And that understanding of family is what we're bumping into in the gospel. Because Jesus changed the traditional understanding of family of his day. The family in his day was the main social and economic unit. And if you belonged to a family, you had a job, you had someone that eventually you could go to marry, you had a place. And if you didn't belong to a family for whatever reason, if you got kicked out of a family, you had no shot. Nobody was going to hire you. No one was certainly ever going to marry you. You had no future, nothing. So the family was everything. And Jesus, he didn't behave the way you're supposed to behave when you belong to a family. He went down to the Jordan River. He was baptized by John, and then he began this, religious movement. And he began drawing a lot of people to himself, people who were hungry and people who were sick, and he began working miracles and curing the sick and driving out the devils, and it was wild. And Jesus, what are you doing? And even when he came back to his hometown, he had people crowding in all around him, and his family didn't know what to make of this, which is why we heard in the gospel they came to take him away and basically to say to him, stop this nonsense. What is it that you're doing? Just come back home and stop all this miracle working and all this preaching and all these people. Stop that. Behave. Do what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to grow up and get married and have kids and take care of the family. That's what you're supposed to do. And Jesus wasn't doing that at all. And his family didn't know what to make of him. And for that matter, neither did the Sadducees, who heard about all these miracles that he was doing. And they didn't doubt the miracles. They knew that there was exorcisms taking place and healings taking place. But when they came to confront Jesus, they came up with this crazy idea that, he's able to drive out devils because Satan is giving him the power to drive out devils. And even Jesus said that's nonsense. Satan doesn't drive out Satan. A house divided against itself can't stand. That's ridiculous. But they didn't know what to make of him. And his family didn't know what to make of him. And in fact, when everyone was crowding in around him in this house he was in, they said to him, your mother and your family is outside calling for you. And then we hear Jesus change what family means. And he said, who is my mother? Who are my brothers? Those who hear the word of God and follow it, they are mother and father and brother to me. That's my family. And his family, for him, became the tax collectors, the prostitutes. His family became all of those hungry people dying for something to eat. His family became all of the sick, the lepers, the crippled. Those were his family members. And those were the people who followed him. A few others, some Pharisees, some Sadducees, heard that word of God and they were able to follow also. But for the most part, they didn't know what to make of him. And in fact, in time, they were tired of this rabble-rouser, of this Jesus, this miracle worker, all these people following him. You can understand why the response was, just get rid of him. Let's just get rid of him and stop all this nonsense. Somebody kill him, will you? But this family of God that he started, it didn't stop with his death. It kept on going. And we see with the apostles, them leading Jews to sit down and have dinner with Gentiles, something that ordinarily would never have happened. And Greeks and Jews sharing the table together, something that would never have happened. And we begin seeing everybody is invited into this family. And you didn't have to be a Jew. You didn't have to be a follower of Moses. It was a whole new way of understanding who you belonged to. Jesus rocked the boat. And when you rock the boat, people get wet. And people didn't like it. No wonder they killed him. Well, like I said, the church we live in right now is composed of families so different than it was when I was growing up. And my mom even told me that when she was a little girl growing up, the church, well, the Catholic Church was there, but it was the Polish Catholic churches over here, and they had their church. And the Irish Catholic Church is over here, and it had his church. And the Italian church was over here, and they had their church. And never the twain shall meet. And everybody had their own respective churches. And you know, we may look on that right now as kind of quaint, but that's the way it was back then. And you know, it's not too far off from the way sometimes our churches are now. What we understand to be our family of God, our church family, well, that's evolving, even in our own lifetime. As I said before, the earth under our feet is continuously moving. I worked at St. Columbkille's Parish in Los Angeles, which for decades was a traditionally African-American parish. It is where everybody went if they wanted to know what an African-American liturgy was like, what the music was like, what the customs were like. But in time, lots of Latinos began moving into South Central. And pretty soon that church started changing. And these Latinos brought with them their customs and their language. And African Americans didn't know what to make of this. And who are all these people? And who's in the world are Lady Guadalupe and all of these traditions? And the earth was moving under their feet. And that church changed into being a solid Latino parish. And even as I was leaving a few years ago, that was changing, because into the parish was coming Asian Catholics, Korean Catholics, and Filipino Catholics, bringing their prayers and their tradition and their language. And what in the world is Simbang Gabi all about? And what language is Tagalog? And in the family that we call our church, the family that Christ has created, continuously is evolving and changing. So, what does this family of God, this family that Jesus called to himself, what does it look like? Well, the great Irish author, James Joyce, described the Catholic Church like this. Being Catholic means, here comes everybody. And when everybody's coming, it can be unsettling. It can be, we don't know where our place is, or who are all these people, and we can find ourselves uncertain of whether we go to these houses and bless them or not. So let's go back to that original question. What do you do? Do you go to those homes and bless them and have meal with them or not? You know, it's a tough question. And you can make a case either way for doing it or for not doing it. But it's really obvious what Jesus decided. He had meals with those tax collectors and those prostitutes, regardless of what people were going to think about him. And he did it not so that he would look to be one of them, but he did it in hopes that his love for them would make them want to follow him and become like him. So, here's what I'd like us to do. What I'd like us to do is just think about it. Think about what the family of our church looks like. Give some thought to who belongs in this family of God. give some thought to how it has been and continues to change. And that some thought to how Jesus, as he did in his day, so he is in our day, inviting us to come and sit at table with him. You know, that's a risk, because you don't know who you're going to be sitting next to.